So hello, everyone. I hope everyone that is on the system can see the screen, but I want to welcome you to our webinar today. We're so excited that you could all join. My name is Judy Brous, and I'm the Executive Director of the North American Association for Environmental Education. We're the professional association for environmental education in North America, and we're all about advancing environmental literacy and civic engagement. And we're also very excited to be doing this webinar focused on part 2 of building a successful 21st century EE movement, accelerating diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's part 2 of what we had before the conference with part 1 with our panelists here. We're also, and I'll talk more about who's on and introduce our moderator, but we have a stellar group here and really excited, especially given the election and the work that happened at the conference, to be able to have this webinar at this time. And we're very excited to be doing this series in conjunction with our affiliates. So welcome to our affiliate members. We have 57 state, provincial, and regional affiliates across North America, and we are very happy to be doing this in partnership with many of our affiliates. So, as many of you know who have joined past webinar series, that we are trying every month to do a webinar approximately at the same time and present cutting edge information, new ideas, new leaders, new speakers, of giving us all an opportunity to really highlight different topics of interest to everybody working in environmental education. And we have had extremely high interest, of course, in better understanding how environmental education can advance a more inclusive, equitable, and diverse movement, the general environmental movement, and the work that we can do in environmental education. So we're very excited to have this opportunity today. Our next webinar is going to be on December 6th with Joseph Kursky from Esri, who's going to be talking about field data and web mapping. And then in January on the 24th, we'll have Sean Martin from WWF talking about climate change and community resiliency. Just so you know, this will not be the last time we have a webinar related to diversity, inclusion, and equity. And so we have a lot of other things planned for next year. And I want to thank Kristen Kunkel on our team, who has done so much to help promote this, organize it, think about it, work with all of our panelists and all of our speakers to make this work. So Kristen, thank you so much. And she's helping to facilitate the entire series, but is also there if you need technical support. And so what we're going to do today is, just after this quick introduction, then I'm going to turn it over to Darryl, who's going to be moderating it. And I'd like to introduce Darryl in a moment, and he will introduce the panelists. We did get questions from many of you, so thanks to all of you who sent in questions for the panelists in advance. Also take more, and whatever we don't get to, we will be able to post on EE Pro afterward, and Darryl will talk more about that. But it really helps to hear what you're thinking, what the issues are that you have, and how we can move forward. And at the very end, we'll have a few closing thoughts. So just so you know how to ask a question, when you click on the chat, it's on the black toolbar that's at the top of your screen. That chat box will appear, and you can send a note to me or Kristen. You can send a note to everyone, but we'll be monitoring that and get it to the panelists and to Darryl so that they can respond. And even if we just answered all the questions you've already sent in, we'd be here for probably 3 or 4 hours. So we're going to do our best. We're going to do our best. But it's great that there's a lot of interest and some really wonderful questions and ideas that are going to be coming. So I'd now like to introduce Darryl, who's the moderator. And I've had the pleasure of working with Darryl, as I mentioned last time, since I started at NAAE. We both worked at Audubon at some point. We couldn't have a more skilled and thoughtful moderator for today's session. And I do want to tell you a little bit about Darryl's background so you know where he's coming from. He serves as the education coordinator for the West Basin Municipal Water District, a local government agency that provides water to over 1 million people in coastal LA. He earned his BS degree in environmental education from Humboldt State University, and he has more than 30 years of education program development and fundraising experience with local, state, and national environmental organizations. He helped establish the Hawaii Environmental Ed Association. He served as a steering committee member for the Golden State Environmental Education Consortium. He's a board member of the California Environmental Education Foundation. Is one of the current diversity inclusion EE Pro moderators for NAAE. His passion is about strengthening the communication networks and available resources for urban EE organizations. And his efforts have included expanding the community outreach for an EE grant program to diverse populations for Save the Redwoods. Save the Redwoods League, building the first LA Urban Nature Center for the National Audubon Society at Debs Park, created an environmental education job training program for urban young adults in the West Basin Municipal Water District. And he's been just a great supporter of the work we're trying to do in NAAE. So we're really lucky to have him as a moderator for this webinar, and he will be introducing our amazing lineup of panelists. So Darryl, take it away.
Thank you, Judy. And it's really my honor to be here with our guest panelists and to really tap into their expertise and knowledge and lift up their good work within the EE profession, promoting the need for equity and inclusion and diversity within our field. Let me go ahead and introduce our distinguished panelists. First, we have Audrey Peterman, who is nationally recognized as a leader in the environmental movement, making America's national parks and public lands relevant to every demographic group in our population, and showing them as the glue that holds our country together. She is the president of Earthwise Productions Incorporated, which provides consulting and training services to public land managers, conservation organizations, and others seeking to gain market share in urban communities. She's serving a fifth three-year term on the board of the National Parks Conservation Association and has won multiple national awards for her work. She writes prolifically about the public lands and the environment for multiple audiences, includes 2 books, several Black-focused weekly newspapers, and blogs for the Huffington Post. Since 1995, Audrey and her husband Frank have been traveling the national parks, forests, wildlife refuges, and open spaces, and are so eminently familiar with the effects of our changing climate. Today, Audrey weaves the themes of relevance, inclusiveness, natural resource protection, and climate resilience into spellbinding presentations that bring our current situation into sharp focus. With 175 units of the park system under her belt, Audrey and her husband were named Yosemite Ambassadors in 2016. Audrey's books include Legacy on the Land, A Black Couple Discovers Our National Inheritance and Tells Why Every American Should Care, and the travel guide, Our True Nature, Finding a Zest for Life in the National Park System. Audrey, thank you so much for being here today.
My thrill and pleasure.
Many want to save the planet, but few sit down to plan it. Stefan Moss is an environmental scientist and educator with a passion for engaging businesses, schools, and nonprofit organizations in the faith community and encouraging them to become active participants in the environmental movement. He is the founder and principal of Solomon's Mind, which specializes in environmental education curriculum development and sustainability consulting. He's a member of NAAE and currently serves as department chair and professor of environmental science at Lincoln College of Technology in Marietta, Georgia. Along with his work in science education, Stefan is a Dove Award-winning singer and songwriter and composes nature-inspired music that includes themes related to the outdoors. He holds a bachelor's degree in chemistry and biology with a minor in religious studies from Lee University and a master's degree in environmental science from the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. Stefan, thanks for joining us today. Oh, is your microphone on?
Okay, there we go.
All right.
It's good to be here.
Marcelo Bonta is a trailblazer on diversity, equity, and inclusion issues in the environmental movement. He currently works as the Philanthropy Northwest Momentum Fellow at Meyer Memorial Trust in Oregon. He is implementing the Healthy Environment Program, which includes equity as its foundation. Marcelo is the founder of the Center of Diversity and the Environment, otherwise known as CDE, and the Environmental Professionals of Color. With CDE, Marcelo worked with over 350 diversity change agents through transformational leadership programs and over 60 organizations and foundations through high-impact organizational change work. In 2008, he co-wrote with Charles Jordan a visionary article entitled Diversifying the American Environmental Movement. His work has been featured in numerous publications, including the New York Times. Marcelo serves on the Green 2.0 Advisory Board, Diverse Environmental Leaders Speaker Bureau, Climate Access Advisory Council, and Columbia Land Trust Advisory Council. He is also a Together Green Conservation Fellow. Marcelo, thanks for being here also.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and excited to see where the conversation goes. Yes,
and just as a reminder for our audience that is joining us, this is the part 2 of this session, Building a Successful 21st Century EE Movement. Part 1 can be found on the NAAWE website. Go to the past webinars and you'll see part 1. During part 1, our distinguished panelists shared more specific details of their wonderful work within their specific areas. Building relationships with governmental decision makers, building relationships and working towards equity and inclusion in the philanthropic community, the academic institutions, and the faith communities. So if you want to hear specifics and some best practices that maybe you can model, go listen to that webinar. We also, during that webinar, dispelled the myth that equity and inclusion work is hard to do. We actually realized and promoted the idea that it's actually very easy to do. As long as you have the passion to do it, you approach it with an open mind, or are just willing to reach out and shake somebody's hand. But along with that, you have to come along with the attitude of humility about your own background and willingness to learn from others. So those are some personal characteristics or qualities that you may want to consider moving forward with your own efforts. As far as organizational change for the places that you work, we determined that developing attainable goals, making sure that any strategies that were developed are measurable and can be accounted to, keeping your staff accountable to that, and making equity and inclusion the foundation of your organization's mission will really result in the success that you're looking towards or moving towards. And we ended with a very important understanding that just as any organization develops a budget towards fundraising assistance or legal assistance or strategic planning assistance, if you really want to do good diversity and inclusion work for your organization, you'll have to dedicate a budget. If it's that important to you, you need to put your money where the effort needs to go. So again, we won't necessarily cover some of those topics today because we wanted part 2, this webinar session, to be dedicated to answering your questions. So again, if you have questions that pop up, go ahead and type it into the chat box. We'll try to get to it. If we don't have enough time, our panelists have been generous in sharing their time starting today up until next Wednesday, the 23rd. They'll be checking in at least once a day to our discussion board on the EE Pro Diversity Group webpage, and the conversation will continue for the next following week. Every month we try to have a guest that's doing great work within diversity, equity, inclusion, and you can also look at those past conversations to see if there is any benefit that can help you with your own efforts. So knowing that we're going to be answering your questions today, we have, as Judy said, several questions that have already been forwarded to us. And I think what's on everybody's mind is this past very contentious and divisive political environment. And I think many people are still trying to adjust their feelings, their strategies for their employment moving forward with the new president-elect that's going to be taking office. So knowing that we many of our audience members are coming from many different political backgrounds, affiliations. This first question that was posed to us on November 9th asks, what can one do with right-wing conservative politicians who deny global warming, threaten to dissolve the EPA, and think of the environment only in economic terms? I'd like to open that up for anybody who would like to respond to that question.
I'll start. This is Marcelo. You know, one thing I think that's happening is over time, our political system has, you know, on one hand, we're talking about that being divisive, but I also think that we keep on talking to each other, like liberals talking to liberals, conservatives talking to conservatives. And we need to find more opportunities to talk to each other. And so, you know, for me, and I think for environmentalists in general, we don't do that enough. We don't talk to the global warming deniers. We don't talk to people at different spectrums of the political ideologies. And I think one thing that we can do, and this is something I learned when I was working at the Center for Diversity in the Environment, the role of emotional intelligence, the role of humility, compassion, empathy, the role of seeing everybody's humanity in this work, no matter where they're coming from, no matter what attitudes or opinions they have, whether I agree with them or not, is we need to see people for who they are. I think a lot of the upheaval, a lot of the discussions that are going on right now is, I think there's a lot of people that are insecure and that are fearful of what's out there. No matter where you are on the political spectrum, I think that fear is real in so many different ways. So for me, it is, you know, coming directly to this question is how do I see the humanity in the person I'm talking to? How can I talk and build relationships and have a understanding of who this person is first, and then talking about these issues and opinions and attitudes about different areas. And you know, in the end, you may not sway this person, and in the end, you may not be swayed either. But I think in the end, a real important piece is that we build relationships so we can have really good discussions about this. You know, and then the last thing that I heard from this question is, for a person who thinks of environmental issues in only economic terms, what do I do? And I think that's the answer. The answer is, if they're only looking at the environmental issues in economic terms, talk to them in economic terms. And I think right now, the emerging green economy, there's a lot of money to be made in the emerging green economy, or you could say the emerged green economy. And if you could bring that, if this person's just thinking about how much money they can make, you know, bring up these opportunities. And if they decide not to support the green economy, just tell, you know, they're losing an opportunity to make money now and far into the future, because the green economy is only going to grow from here on out. And it's just a matter of who wants to participate and who doesn't.
And I completely support what Marcelo said. I'm a big proponent of recognizing everyone's humanity and dealing with each other from a heart level. And I also am aware of, I believe it was Upton Sinclair who said, you can wake a person who is sleeping, but you cannot wake a person who's pretending to be asleep. You can wake a person who's sleeping, but you cannot wake a person who's pretending to be asleep. And I think that there are occasions and instances where we're talking with people who have a vested interest in professing that they don't believe. And so really at this point where I recognize that I must keep my energy and my focus high and moving forward to make a difference in this arena, after I've done all the things that Marcelo mentioned, if the person is not swayed, I keep my heart and my mind open to them, but I'm going to move on and read some other people who are not pretending to be asleep.
Great.
Permit me to add just one additional thing. In my classrooms, I observe that the more literate my students are, the more confident they are in those scientific issues, then the more they feel as if they can speak. And so I feel like, as you know, education serves a very important role in this. A lot of times I find politicians have I don't know if it's sincere or if it's false, but they don't really understand the scientific issue that they're speaking of. And so providing more education and more exposure to these basic scientific ideas to our citizens will empower them to say, well, hey, here's what I understand. Here's a scientific paper or journals that support this work, and I understand those journals, and so I can write to my senator, I can write to my local mayor and say, hey, I know that you guys believe this, but here's what science says, and here's what published scientists have done, and we have 100+ years of data. Are you guys just going to turn your back on basic science ideas? I mean, some of these things aren't hard to find. So the more educated our citizens are, the more they can speak confidently about these issues, and the more they can press political leaders to reconsider their opinions, because ultimately we move forward with objective truth as a society. The more objective truth we have, the more we can stand behind that and make the change that we need to make. So that's my bit there.
Before we leave the topic of the election, are there any words of inspiration that you would like to share with all of us who realize that the halfway for us for the next 4 years may be a lot?
Well, Audrey, can I speak?
Go ahead.
So I want to say we should not allow ourselves to feel defeated. I am talking to so many people who are so sad and feeling defeated, and on the other hand,
Audrey, are you still there? I think we lost you. Maybe as she tries to get back online, Marcelo or Stefan, did you have any other comments before we move on from this topic?
Yeah, I'll just say so. I mean, a couple things. One is, I mean, it's been a tough week. No matter where you are in the political spectrum, there's divisiveness happening there, whether it's politics or it's hate being out there. And that's one of the most disturbing things that I'm seeing that's out there. And so a very inspirational quote. So on one hand, I think it's okay for people to be upset, feel all those emotions that you need to feel. And eventually, though, use it in a way that can be productive and creating the society you hope to live into, right? So one quote that really has spoken to me it's a Martin Luther King Jr. quote, and it says, "Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." So it just continues to remind me that we can't battle hate with hate. It's not going to get us anywhere. It's not going to sway anybody. It's just going to breed more hate. And though the tough thing is how do you enter these spaces with love? And I think it takes a lot of training and understanding and intentionality to do that. And it's tough for me, but I know I've had a lot of practice in a lot of spaces, contentious discussions around race and racism over the years. But I also need to continue to train myself and remind myself how to do that. But so that's one commitment I have in moving forward, is entering spaces with love. And part of that gets back to what I was mentioning earlier is how do you enter space with love? In one way is seeing people's humanity. Who are you? Who are you as a personal, as a person? I hear these things coming out of your mouth that are actually hurting me and are hurtful, but what's going on with you as a person? Can I get to know who you are and where that's coming from? Because I actually have a feeling that you're hurting inside too. So how do I enter that space with love?
Audrey, you're about to share something. Your microphone's off.
Oh, okay. Yes, I was saying that as challenging as the political sphere appears to be at the moment, I am not feeling at all stressed or anxious. I feel that we are where we are and we must accept that. And simultaneously, we have to expand the coalitions that we build, because we now understand that given the Republican Party's stated objectives for the environment and for the public land system, we must understand that only by bringing all parties together, or as many parties as possible, to push back against that, only in that context are we going to be able to sustain our public land system and a healthful environment. So instead of feeling defeated or even challenged, I'm really looking at how many other people who are currently feeling distressed or feeling that, you know, everything that we treasure is under attack. How many of those people can I also now bring over to the side of cherishing and protecting our environment and public lands and our common humanity, our people, our country? And I do that, part of how I do that is by bringing out the history of how the public land system is created and the stories that are contained in the public land system that show the vast spectrum of race and ethnicity and gender and sexual orientation, religious, etc., that have contributed to the development of that public land system and also contributed to the development of our country and getting us to where we are today. So by raising those stories of our commonality, I strive to get more people on board to deal with the important issues of protecting our public lands treasury and protecting our environment.
Thanks. Stefan, did you have anything you wanted to share?
Yeah, I want to submit that, you know, the last 5 letters in the word opportunity is unity. And, you know, as Marcelo mentioned and as Ms. Audrey already mentioned, when we try to find those common themes that we all can stand on and agree on, that creates an opportunity for real change. So sure, we may disagree ideologically on certain political issues. We may not necessarily share the same concentration of melanin, but do we all have a passion and love to see, you know, our beaches, our forests, our public lands protected for our grandchildren? Can we all agree that pure air is something that we want to have? Clean water is something that we all want to have. If we can agree on those basic things and stand together, then we can start to have a real conversation now about what we're going to do. Maybe the way we go about doing things may differ. Maybe we may have different outlooks on how things should be done. But the only way we're going to move forward, I believe in any type of strategic way, is if we try to find those common elements that we can stand on.
And a great example of that is what's happening now with the indigenous tribes in the oil pipeline, North Dakota. They're beginning to look at partnerships with property owners, agricultural landowners to try to block the pipeline by those unique partnerships. So talking to other people who they hadn't really thought of before. The next question was submitted, let's see, back on October 25th, and I think, Marcelo, you started to address it a little bit. This question asks, if someone says something to you that's offensive or makes you uncomfortable, how do you give feedback in a way that doesn't shame the person?
Yeah, you know, I'll say one thing is, first of all, pick your battles. You know, if you think there's an opportunity, you know, like why first of all you're confronting, you want to educate this person. I mean, sometimes people do want to shame them, so in front of other people, because that may be something that works. So think about, in terms of your strengths, your type of approach that works best for you in times when you're having conversations that can be confrontational. Also, you know, the other thing I would assess is, like, do I have a relationship with this person or not? And you know, for me, I feel I do best in one-on-one conversations. I don't like to shame people in front of a crowd. So I may either talk to them on the side, one-on-one, and have a discussion, emotionally intelligent discussion, bring curiosity. Where is this coming from? Why are you saying this? Letting them know that for me, it's hurtful to hear that. And bringing empathy and compassion into that. And if there are ways to, I mean, for me, entering that space, the goal would be to help educate this person who may not know what they're doing. But sometimes there's times when I see something like this, and I'm like, no matter what I say to this person, it's probably not going to get anywhere. They're still going to have their same emotions, their same approach and opinions. And for me, for some people, that may be a great space. They like to be in that space. For me, I don't like to spend my time and energy in that space. I like to spend my time and energy, as Audrey was talking about earlier, with people who want to learn, who want to understand, who want to grow, and be better people, and really respect other people around them. Those are the people that I like to work with, and I could feel I can make some headway with.
Audrey or Stefan, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I can add something. I want to say, because I encounter people all the time where, they say something and they are refuting, something that I'm saying, either in the classroom or sometimes in presentations that I give. One thing I try to do is I try to treat their statement as a situation where they're pulling from genuine ignorance, where they really don't know. And it's up to me as an educator, it's up to me as someone that's informed to not get offended at their ignorance, but to use it as a teaching or as a learning opportunity for them. So that's my first kind of step. If I see where the person, after I've provided you with all of the relevant information to help you to see the light, if you then continue on in your nonsense, then as Marcelo says, now it's time to move forward. But treating it as a state of genuine ignorance gives them the opportunity to come to the level of understanding, and then gives you as the informed individual a chance to pull them up, which is what we should be doing anyway. We should be pulling people up to a level of understanding. Although, as mentioned earlier, some people don't want to come up.
So that question dealt more with having the personal experience and developing skills on how to express your feelings. But this next question deals with trying to improve the overall organization or the overall effort. The question is, please share strategies for dealing with white colleagues who don't seem to understand the importance of speaker diversity when planning a conference or training. I tried. We are failing in this entire workshop if our speakers are middle-aged white people, but that strategy didn't move the planners at all. Suggesting possible speakers, fail. For that workshop, the planning team was adamant that subject matter experts that they personally knew were qualified were to be the top choices. Note, I'm a middle-aged white person, and so was the entire workshop planning team. Any thoughts?
So, can you hear me? Because I've lost my video. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. So, I'd like to, in a situation like that, I would like to point to the definition of leadership. I haven't looked it up actually, but I believe that leadership means a leader is able to look down the road and anticipate problems or challenges and do things to head them off. So if you're a leader in an environment and in a society that is increasingly diverse in its racial and ethnic composition, and you do not see the necessity of becoming more engaged with a wider spectrum of that diversity, then I would challenge whether you're a leader or not. And I am sorry, I don't mean ever to be confrontational, but I will not have my time wasted. If we're leaders here and we're sitting around talking to people who look just like us, then we might as well be a high school clique.
Any other thoughts, Marcelo or Stefan?
Yeah, a couple things. One is disappointing, first of all, to continue to hear those. That's like a simple thing you could do. One of the easiest things you could do on diversity, equity, inclusion is speakers. You don't have to commit like hiring someone. It's just a speaker. You're reaching out. So the one thing I want to mention a couple things. One is I just wrote an article on white privilege and environmental philanthropy, and it's not just environmental philanthropy where this is a huge challenge. It's an environmentalism across the board. And one thing that we need to really get out of is, is what white privilege and being in these spaces that are all white has caused many of the challenges and problems we face today. So if the one thing I'd like to see is, like, if any of those people in that space are upset with what's going on in today's political climate, I think they need to look in the mirror and look at themselves and the decisions that they're making or not making. Because the answers to many of the challenges, this is what I do. I look out what's going on out there. To be honest, I'm really upset and disturbed. But the one thing that I could do within my control is, what is my sphere of influence and what can I do to make my world better? And in the places where I make important decision makings that affect other people. And this is one simple one in front of this group. Another piece I would work on is, I actually talk to a lot of organizations that are in the same boat. And I tell them, look, you have a choice here. Are you committed to equity, diversity, inclusion, or not? If you are, does it make sense to have all white speakers or not? And if you aren't, just say you're not, and don't fool anybody else that you're doing diversity, equity, inclusion work, and just say we're fine with having all white people, and be honest and straightforward with everybody else out there. And don't fool especially people of color in this work. Don't say you're doing it and then you don't end up having the actions that follow it. And then the last thing I would do is take a step back, and maybe this conversation is an opportunity to bring this discussion up, and take a step back and move. If this is an organization or a committee, what's your foundational work as an organization? How are you building diversity, equity, inclusion in your work? What's your strategy? What's your baseline assessment? Where do you want to go with this? Commit to trainings and learning about. Stefan talked about the importance of education. The importance of education and understanding what diversity, equity, inclusion is as well in this work. And you're not going to get it in many places except for actually specific trainings, unfortunately. I hope our education system does not give us the appropriate training around diversity, equity, and inclusion as we need to be effective. So I would say do your foundational work, and maybe if this is just a committee, maybe before stepping into any committee, you ask how are we going to make decisions? What's the authority here? Do we all have a voice or not? Is diversity, equity, inclusion a part of this? Inclusion should be a part of any group that comes together, first of all. So does my voice support this? Is my voice count in this work or not? So I think taking a step back, and a lot of these examples and questions are coming from like interpersonal and really specific examples of facing challenges. And I think if you're part of an organization or committee, what are you doing to set yourself up for success in these conversations? So if you have these confrontations in the future, it's, you know what, we set up a decision-making process that's about diversity, equity, inclusion. I think part of that is we need to have speakers that represent America. Because if we don't, we're not going to have a diverse set of crowd that's going to come listen to us. We're going to continue to speak to the same middle-class white environmentalists that we've always done before, and have the same conversations and make the same decisions. And if you want to do that, do it, but be explicit about it. So I think there's always choices involved.
And I think that this.
And just to be clear, I want to emphasize that I always posit everything from the context of we need to have a wider swath of the American public involved in the protection of our natural resources and environment as possible if we are to be successful. And you're not going to have that if repeatedly you only have one demographic group presenting.
Especially a shrinking demographic. In the future, there's going to be less of you, and it's going to be smaller. You got to think to the future too. What's the vision? Where do we want to go with environmental protection in this country?
Yeah, sometimes for many folks planning these conferences, they're in their comfort zone, that path of least resistance. So it's easiest just to call up my buddies that I know and put a workshop together without having to to invest the time and energy and resources to go to, you know, the Environmental Speakers Bureau that Miss Audrey has, or to call up CDE and try to find some other voices. It's just easier. So what we have to do is to balance the ease and the comfort zone of the least resistance with the value of having voices that actually represent what America looks like, and to show that, you know, pound for pound, you get more value out of your workshop when you have a diverse speakership versus just your friends that you spent 30 years working with. So maybe some of that is on us to show our visibility, but I think we've already done that. I think, for example, Ms. Audrey has done a fantastic job of putting together, you know, many of the top speakers from around the country, you know, from very diverse ethnic backgrounds and groups. And there are other places where you can find competent people. So it's not a matter of visibility as much as it is people have to step outside their comfort zone. People have to step out of the path of least resistance and see what the future looks like. And as Marcelo mentioned, that comes with education. If you study the demographic changes, if you study, you know, what statistics will tell you, you know, you'll know that appealing to a shrinking demographic really doesn't make any sense from a success standpoint.
But also, wouldn't also be challenging the person who submitted this question, because it sounds like they're a lone voice within this planning group. You know, do some introspection of the service that your group provides. I mean, do the diverse groups even want to participate in the conference in the first place? And if there is, maybe they can actually build some capacity so they're not the lone voice, that audience that they're trying to target, whether it's, you know, a racial group or a faith-based group, whatever. They could lend a voice to say, yeah, we would be interested if you did this approach or you had these speakers. So one person isn't the sole voice, but there is actually support from that community they're trying to tap.
Yes, and if I might add as well, when I go into a room, and just speaking as a person of color, and I would imagine almost the majority of people now, when you go to an event and you see people of one demographic group, you already know that that's a losing team. That's a losing team, because America is not one demographic group. So I would encourage the person who has this particular dilemma, and anybody who does, to point out to their collaborators or their group that, look, we are not built for success if we are just among us, just talking to each other.
I want to also bring up the part of this question, this idea, this assumption of experts as well. And for one person's perspective on who's an expert is not the same as another person's perspective. So the one thing we got to think about is, you know, for this person, and how are you defining expert? Someone who's from an Ivy League college and has a PhD and has a science, you know, is a scientist. Is that an expert? You know, I think you could talk to a lot of other communities and ask that same thing, and they'll define an expert as someone else, an elder in my tribe, who we all respect and has a wealth of information and wisdom. That's the expert who I respect. And if that person's presenting at a conference, I'm there and I'm going because I respect what that person has to say. So we have to expand if we're really trying to understand, you know, and then even the groups that on the Diverse Environmental Leader Speakers Bureau that Audrey put together. I look at that lineup, and I'm like that's a dream lineup. If you had if that was a conference that Audrey put together with all those speakers, I'm there. And you know what? I'm learning a lot, and I'm participating in those conversations. I have no interest in going to any conferences that are just all white people, because you know what? Those are all the conferences I've gone to my whole life. So I've learned as much as I can in that regard. I want to learn something new and different, and connect to people who look like me and who look like America. So again, what's the perspective on experts and who people respect in the environmental movement? It's different depending on who you are, and that's the brilliance of diversity and how we look at the world differently.
Absolutely. Here's a more technical question that was submitted, and it asks, do you have any tips and tricks for coordinating the translation of resources? At Hennepin County, we have created a translation style guide and a translation review survey for community members. This seems to work, but I'm wondering if there is another way. Also, is there a database of translated EE resources anywhere?
Let me jump on this. I actually looked through some of the environmental science textbook publishers to see if they have translated textbooks. So I can speak in terms of textbooks. Many of the textbooks that I use in my environmental science class, you can find copies of them in other languages. It takes a little bit of kind of, dirty work, if you will, calling the publisher, calling some of your local representatives and seeing how you can get a copy and assess it. But many publishers of environmental science textbooks have those texts translated in Spanish and a few other languages, depending on where they're being sent out to.
Marcelo, Audrey, have you had any experiences having to provide translations of any sort?
I have not. I have not.
Just the one thing I want to say, and I know this is specific about resources, but I do want to mention, like, if you are specifically reaching out, you have an event, there's a specific community, Latino community, Chinese community, Filipino community that you want to specifically reach out to for around this event that's within the city you live. I think the best thing to do is like, hopefully you've built relationships with this community. I know, in different languages, there's different types of slang and dialects that work. And there's ones that don't. If you don't get it right, it's like you're speaking, I'm Filipino, you translate something in Ilocano, but everybody speaks Tagalog. It's not going to work to communicate with the Filipino community there. So I think if you have relationships built with the community and getting some feedback, and maybe there's a participation, you could pay the people to help interpret some of the materials you want to share. I think that's an important piece as well.
Yeah, what I say is, what better way to develop an ambassador or advocate for your particular program within the community that you are trying to reach and work with. I'm sure that there's somebody within that community that would be more than happy to help translate for you. I think the trick is trying to get somebody who's nuanced in the proper grammar, the proper slang, and that can do it in an authoritative, accurate manner. That's what I've learned from my own experience. Our EE Center is not diverse, though our city is. And I'd love to bring more of our community to our site. How does a nerdy white lady who loves nature reach out to these different communities and neighborhoods?
Ooh, I'm excited about that one. Make friends. Certainly, there has to be some areas in your life, in your community, where you have relationships across the race barrier. Go to a church, talk to the minister or to the youth minister, talk to somebody and let them know what you have. The biggest thing that we can do is to let people know the resources that we have, the natural resources we have. Because everybody, is appreciative now of the idea of getting out into nature gently. They want to be introduced by somebody that they know and trust. And ideally, we find that if you take people out to a place, our first trip is always to someplace very scenic. We're not taking anybody on an 8-mile hike, rugged hike, nor are we taking them on a 16-mile canoe trip. We're inviting them to come out with us and see this beautiful natural space and have a gentle walk in the park, look at the birds, feel the wind, see, just reconnect with nature, and also mentioning that there's a spiritual and health component associated with that. Many doctors are now prescribing nature as a remedy for multiple maladies. So I would say, find the local Black, Hispanic, Asian newspaper, go talk to the editor, write them an article with pictures that show the demographic group that they're keyed into, what you have to offer, and invite them. And I also want to say, we never take people out without providing some food, because you don't want people outside. No, let's put it this way. When you have people outside in the fresh air and they're getting an appetite, it's also so helpful and communal and inviting and loving to have some food and refreshments. And then, wow, it's a day in the park. What could be better than that?
Anybody else want to share?
Yeah, how can you pass up food? Jeez.
Right?
Yeah, we tend to overlook the communal relationship building power of food.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
I'm smiling and laughing about it, but it's true. Like there's something to be said about food and sitting around and building community around eating and sharing. One thing I would say to this person who wants to open up their space to the diversity of their city, I think, one thing I've seen, I've written a couple of papers on building relationships with communities of color, and one successful way I've seen is when organizations go to community events, you stretch yourself, get out of your comfort zone. And if you want to work, for example, there's this example I have on the top of my head of this group who wanted to reach out to the local Latino community. And everything they were doing wasn't working. They were putting paper flyers around their center. They were sending out emails. They're doing all this stuff, the normal stuff they do. And the most populous community around their center was the Latino community. It was something like 2/3 to 3/4 Latinos, and none of them were coming. But in this and many other instances I see is that once they started to go to the community events, for example, they shared an example of going to a fiesta, no environmental theme at all, but they're like, there's an opportunity to set up a table, and we're going to set up and talk about our organization. And you know what? They went the first time and no one went to their table. But then they kept on showing up. They went to the next community event, and then the next community event, and the next community event, until finally someone from the community was like, these people aren't going away. They keep on showing up, so I might as well go talk to them. So, and then there was also this idea of this group showing up of a visibility of being there in the community space. And that was just the beginning of the relationship. And so, the lesson for me was that when you go to communities in their space for celebrations or around things that they value, it shows that you care, and it shows that you want to build a relationship. And then from there, it just started the conversation of like, oh, why are you showing up? What is this about? Oh, you have birds, you have snakes. What is this? And then it opens up the conversation, say, you know what, just up the road, we have a center, and it's open to all of you if you want to come up, and I'd love to invite you. So I think the relational aspect and relationship building and seeing and meeting people where they're at, literally and figuratively, goes a long way. I think another thing is to, really understand the community that you want to build relationships, do some homework on them, work with organizations that have built trust in these communities already, go to those organizations, and learn, see what they're doing, and what are the opportunities, what are the things that these communities are facing on a daily basis, and just present like, is this something of interest? I have this center here that has great outdoor space, whatever it may have to offer. I could see being a great asset for your community, but what do you think? We could start with a partner event, because they know you, but they don't know us. So we could partner, and you could host, and we could just open our space up to you and your community. So those are a few things. And just also understanding there's also cultural differences, how different communities engage in the outdoors. Some like to bring their families and extended families. It's important to go if you want to connect with kids. I've seen connect with parents and the whole families, because there's a trust building factor that parents need to know who you are and respect you before they're going to leave their kids with you. So there's so many things. I'll stop there, as I do a half-day workshop on it.
I'm eager to jump in and say, before you go out to extend yourself, do your internal work. I have no defensiveness. I'm not defensive. so that even if somebody were to say something to me that I could construe as objectionable, you know, I would stop and think about it for a minute before I respond, you know, angrily. So, and I would say, excuse me, this is how this sounds to me. Is that how you mean it to sound? Actually, that's how my husband and I keep our relationship clean. This is how it sounds to me. Is that what you meant to convey? Okay. So a great deal of patience, a great deal of optimism, and bring some excitement with you. You know, you cannot attract me if you come and you're dull. I'm sorry, because I don't do dull. You've got to have, what you're offering has to have some excitement, some passion. It's got to be something new and wonderful. So go with that. Don't be defensive. I mean, you don't have to explain yourself. You're here because you have something amazingly wonderful and very necessary to share, and you just are eager to do that.
Yeah, I think the nuance is finding how to make that relevant to that particular group. I know for my own effort, it's a great place to find those leaders within the community, is starting with the council person of your area, because they know all the churches are active, the youth groups, the environmental justice groups that could easily connect with what you're already doing. And you get those advocates involved in your program, they'll spread it to their whole networks, and then you'll have a flood of people wanting to take advantage of whatever programs you have to offer.
Yeah, being creative is a very important thing as well. After you've done your homework and you know what the community needs, or you are aware of other programs and other centers around, what can you bring to the table that everyone else isn't bringing? You know, what can you offer to the community that other centers or other spaces aren't offering? So be creative. If you know that your community is filled with, if it's a very vibrant artistic community, for example, maybe you want to do a song competition or a poetry competition or something, bring something to the table that will make people want to check you out. Like Ms. Audrey said, be exciting, be relevant, be a voice that people want to hear whenever you're there.
Yeah. We have one last question that we're not going to get a chance to answer because we're coming to the end of our time. So I'm going to plant that as the seed for the question our panelists will be answering online on our discussion board with the Diversity EE Pro group. And that question is, can you provide suggestions for working with families of the underserved to reinforce the EE learning? We do not have a problem involving underserved youth in our EE programs, but getting the families to get involved is a challenge. So you can find out what our panelists' answers are by visiting our webpage and go to the discussion board. With that, I'll turn it back over to Judy. Are you there?
Yes, I am, and I just want to thank you so much. Let's hope that this works, if I can get this back on. Really, thank you so much to the panelists for a great discussion, great insights, great resources, really good concrete suggestions, even great marriage advice. Thank you, Audrey. But I really think you hit so many important highlights, and we have to keep this conversation going. And the questions are really what are on people's minds, and then your insights are really helping us move this forward. So please join the EE Pro discussion group. This is not the last time. We will have webinars focused on issues related to how do we create a more diverse and inclusive movement. This is about the future of the environmental movement. It's about the future of society as we know it. So thank you guys so much. And thanks to all of you who have joined. We really appreciate it. You can find a recording, because I know some of you came on late. You can go to EE Pro and find the past recording, as Darryl said, and this recording and future recordings, because next year, for example, early in the year, we're hoping one of our new advisory council members is going to speak about Indigenous cultures and how the EE community can interact with some of our Native American colleagues, and what does that mean in, again, this new administration. So you can find out about not only webinar series that we're doing, but webinar series that our colleagues are doing. And if you know of webinar series about diversity, equity, and inclusion, anything that would be helpful to all of our audiences, we need to hear, because we need to hear from a lot of different voices. And you can join a number of the different groups and always be thinking about diversity, inclusion, and equity as we're talking about, whether it's early childhood or green schools. It's an issue that runs. It's not just on the diversity, equity, and inclusion discussion board. It's actually running through absolutely everything that NAA is involved in. This is critical to our mission. And I think Audrey said that, and Marcelo, all of you actually said it, that we cannot do this work unless everyone is at the table. And where the population is changing even quicker than we thought, and it's great. We have more diversity, we'll have better thinking, and we all need to understand these issues, all of us, no matter what our race, ethnicity, geography, background is. So December 6th, if you're interested in spatial data and web mapping technology in EE, join us for that webinar with Joseph. That'll be fantastic. If you're interested in climate change and community resiliency, that's coming up in January, and we'll have a list of what else is coming up next year. But I do want to reach out to all of you to keep feeding us ideas of presenters. We want a diverse group of people presenting and diverse topics that represent the breadth and depth of this field. So keep those ideas coming. We hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. We know it'll be very interesting because there will be people that voted across the spectrum having dinner with each other. And as our panelists said, it's a great opportunity to talk with each other and start really trying to hear and listen with our hearts and our minds on how we move things forward. So thank you all for joining, and I hope all of you who are concerned about the election and concerned about the future to keep the faith. We are all working on this together, and we have a lot of people who are working on all these issues that we care about. So thank you all so much, and really have a wonderful holiday next week. And thanks again, Darryl, for great moderation, and to all our panelists and to everybody who joined. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.